Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jim Holland, and I have the privilege of serving as the chaplain at Shawnigan Lake School. I also have the privilege this afternoon of welcoming you, first of all, on behalf of the headmaster and the staff and students of Shawnigan Lake, and also to thank you for being here on behalf of Joanne and Allie and Lizzie. I also would just like to invite you to open your hearts as we gather in this place, this beautiful, sacred place that was special to Peter. And we are in a sacred moment, gathered together to remember the life of this amazing man. So I welcome you, as I say, to open your hearts, and if you require some Kleenex in doing that, it's strategically placed around the chapel. Although Peter did request that this not be a sorrowful event, that it be a time of joy. He was a person who had a great passion for life and a great joy of living. I think that is the tone that he would like us to set this afternoon. So welcome, thank you for coming, and I'll introduce you to Daniel now, who will lead us through the service. I'm sorry, Brian. For some reason I'm nervous, maybe it's the numbers, I don't know.
That's all right. Worse things have been said about me. I'm Brian McDaniel, and Peter has entrusted this ceremony to me. Like many things in his life, Peter planned this ceremony. He had a lot of time to think about it. We're here to remember Peter, to celebrate his wonderful life, to share in his loss, particularly with Joanne and Allie and Lizzie, and mostly in this beautiful setting on this beautiful day to celebrate Peter's life. As I said, Peter planned every aspect of this service. He chose the speakers, he chose the hymns, he even chose the order and the timing, and he even gave instructions on how long each should be. But Peter had the time and the intelligence to do that. For the last 18 months of his life, he was ill, and for the last 2 months of his life, he was very ill. And Peter was a very spiritual man, he was a very thoughtful man, a very intelligent man, and he thought deeply about life and death, and he wasn't afraid to confront death when it came in such an untimely way. So I'm honored to be kind of a master of ceremonies. I know that Peter will be watching, and I will attempt to do my best. Peter had a wonderful smile, and he wants you all to smile throughout this service, even though those smiles may be accompanied by tears. Perhaps one of the reasons why I'm here is I knew Peter for most of his life in the many, many facets of his life. The speakers that you're going to hear come from different compartments of Peter's life, but somehow I had a common thread with Peter for most of that life. He was always Peter. He was never Pete. He was a man of many interests and many talents, and his life was capped by the dignity that he brought to his death. One of my sons, in preparing for this, captured the essence of Peter, and he said simply, Peter was the guy. Peter was the guy that you would want to be with when the going was really tough, when things were really rough, and survival itself was an issue. Peter was the guy. I don't think anything demonstrated this quality more than Peter's dealing with his own survival and his own death. There were hundreds, I think Joanne counted 489 people that visited Peter at the Royal Jubilee Hospital. At times, there was a lineup to get into the waiting room to the waiting room to get to see Peter. But what was most remarkable about those days was the dignity that Peter brought to the occasion. Here was a guy who could lead an expedition up Everest, who spoke quietly and barely through a tracheotomy tube, using hand gestures, breathing every word. It was, as I've said to others, almost a Mandela-like presence that Peter brought to his death. And we were privileged to share that with him and to be comforted by that experience. Peter asked me to perform this role because our lives intersected in many ways. Just to give you an example, our fathers practiced medicine together in Penticton. Dr. Yates was a surgeon. My dad and my wife's dad were his partners as general practitioners. I was probably the first rower that Peter ever met. Peter was in high school. My wife taught Peter to swim. And as you can imagine, within 2 months, the student far surpassed the teacher. In 1980, when I was considering a career change and gave up the practice of law for a year to teach at this school, Peter showed up and was interested in joining the faculty. I told Peter that he must come here, and in 1981, he joined the staff of this school. He never left. Unlike so many people these days who go from job to job, institution to institution, or career to career, Peter found himself at Shawnigan, and I'll comment upon this later, but he loved it here. And he spent many fulfilled years doing many different jobs in this school. It's fitting that we're in this place today. Peter was not a religious man, but he was a spiritual man, deeply spiritual. He found spiritual comfort in the environment. He found spiritual comfort in his fellow man. And this room is a room that Peter loved, the simplicity of it, the raw Douglas fir wood that was milled just miles from here by C.W. Lonsdale, the founder of the school, that was built with the hands of the founder. These were all qualities that Peter cherished and in many ways did emulate. So those are sort of a few introductory remarks. The speakers that we're going to hear, and I'm going to introduce each one very briefly, come from different facets of his life. And the first is his brother Norm. Peter was the eldest of 4 Yates children who grew up in Penticton. Norm was the next eldest. My first experience with Norm and his siblings was when I hired them in 1971, when I was building a commercial building in Penticton, to stuff sawdust as insulation into the walls. We've all come a long way since then, Norm, so you can speak on behalf of the family. Norman?
Let me be the first one to say it today in public here. I really miss you, Pete. Pete was more than just a brother to me. He was a friend in a big way, and we perceived the world together in so many similar ways. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about the early days. Peter was born in Chemainus in 1954. The family, there were 5 of us then, my sister Jan wasn't with us, moved to Penticton in 1959. We stayed there. Peter grudgingly graduated from high school in Penticton in 1972, and I say grudgingly because he really didn't like school. So much so that it really intrigued me that he became a teacher and that it defined who he was. But maybe the reason that he became the teacher and the person that he was because he had such a hard time with high school. Peter always liked to do edgy things. He liked an adrenaline rush. But even when we were kids, he always did things safely. Who was he in the early years? Parents, don't despair. about how your sons will turn out. Keep the faith. Nobody here would be surprised to learn that he was a Queen's Scout, but it may surprise you to learn that he played the accordion. He was always gregarious, not in an outgoing sort of a way, but he kind of had a magnetism to him. And I think we all noticed that when he was in hospital at the end. People came from all around the world to see him. His grade 10 basketball team won a provincial championship, which, by the way, was the last boys' team from a public school, a full-size public school in British Columbia. Sorry, a full-size public school in the Okanagan, to win a provincial championship. If Gord Lister's here, talk to him about the after party. Peter loved to snow ski. He didn't play hoops in grade 11 or 12 because the coach wouldn't let him ski and play basketball. We had some good athletics in Penticton back in the day, and Pete was really a player. Brian said something about Pete was always Peter, and to me he was always Pete. I guess that's what happens when you grow up. You grow into your name at some level, because he did. Pete was competitive by nature. He was also captain of his high school football team. He broke his collarbone during practice in September of his grade 12 year. I don't think he ever touched a football again. He always dated the prettiest girls. He married one of them. He hated getting his picture taken, especially the family Christmas photo. Every year, and there was an every year for family Christmas photos, there was Peter scowling, or just having finished scowling, and Dad was fuming, and the rest of us were grinning happily because of the showdown that either just happened or was about to go down between the two of them. Peter was always myopic. Before he got contact lenses in his last year of high school, he looked like the guy with the glasses and nose disguise. Always. He kind of looked like Dana Carvey in Wayne's World, actually. And I'd like to tell you that his hair was shorter, but it wasn't. Peter looked 21 when he was 16. He had a virtual twin back in those teen years, and the two of them used to blame each other for the various things they got into trouble for. I don't have a lot of time up here, apparently, so I couldn't tell you some of the stories, but I'd sure like to expand on that one. Our family spent a year in England the year that Peter was 11. He and one other boy in his class of over 30 were the only ones who passed their end-of-term exams and were able to move on into an academic stream over in England. We took the Queen Elizabeth I home from England on its last Atlantic voyage to North America. Then we drove across the continent. Holy cramped quarters. 2 adults, 4 kids in a really small English station wagon with all our stuff. Plus, when we got to Alberta, we picked up our Great Dane dog. At the end of grade 12, Peter managed to finagle a scholarship to Outward Bound School in Karameas. The people there and something else clicked for him, and he ended up working there at Outward Bound, and he began an adventure that lasted him a lifetime. He lifeguarded for a couple of summers when he was in high school and right out of high school. He turned his passion into water sports into a couple of summers doing the world's best ever summer job as part of a thing called the Labatt Safe Boating Clinic. Imagine 3 healthy boys in their early 20s driving around the province to all the summer festivals and lakeside resorts in the province in a motorhome, pulling a ski boat and giving clinics on water safety and how-to demonstrations, like how to ski and how to sail and how to canoe, and for Peter, how to kayak, and spread the good name of Labatt's. It was safe, unlimited fun. He spent 2 years at Langara College, during which he managed to snow ski 3 or 4 days a week at Whistler. That's when he met the Crompton family. He first dated Christine, but became lifelong friends with Greg Crompton. Greg can tell you some stories. Pete became a logger when he was 19. He loved logging. For the next 5 years, that summertime work paid the bills and got him a degree in education from UBC and paid for his various travels, including an 8-month stint over in New Zealand where he worked at an outward bound school there. And he found out who he really wanted to be, and it formed some lifelong friendships for him. Pete tried skydiving once. It was shortly before he and Greg drove to Mexico. Again, more stories. Talk to Greg. Peter loved to tell this story about his first time out of an airplane skydiving. He landed 2 fields away from where he was supposed to. He executed a perfect parachute roll into, through, and into another pile of manure. Pete started rowing the first year that he went to UBC. The next year, he earned his way into 5-seat between Ken Ray and Alan Elliott in a rather exceptional lightweight rowing crew that Jeff Allister coached in 1978. It was through rowing that he became close to Johnny Mikas, and that led to his passion for river rafting. It fueled his love for the outdoors, and it was part of the signature to his lifestyle and to the teacher that he aspired to be. I've exceeded my allotted time. I knew I would. Sorry, Pete. I'm hearing that music playing. Thank you all for coming on behalf of the family. I just wanted to say one more thing. I'm not supposed to eulogize, but it's this. Peter loved the vast silence of the outdoors and the song of a river. He loved the adventures that so many of you in this room experienced with him in the great outdoors. Peter also loved the concept of the universe. I truly believe that Peter believed when he died that life and death are intertwined. There is no beginning and there is no end. I really believe that Peter believed that. Thank you very much.
And please clap, although this is a chapel and a religious institution, we're not going to hold you to formality. Thanks, Norm. You did go over your allotted time, and you're going to have to deal with Allie. But Norm did touch on the outdoors, and our next speaker is Hugh Wilson, who is a fellow river raft guide with Peter. Peter was what I would call the quintessential British Columbian. He probably saw more and knew more about this province than just about anyone else other than people like Johnny Mikas and Hugh Wilson, his fellow rafting guides. He loved this province and he loved this island, and Hugh will share some of the passion that Peter had for the outdoors.
Well, first of all, what a magnificent sight to see so many people here. It's a great testament to a great guy. If you had a chance to visit Peter in the hospital and saw the throngs of people waiting to see him, you'll understand that he had a remarkable network of friends in so many different worlds: teaching, rowing, New Zealand, Thailand, outdoor education, leadership, his own kids' sports. And if you're in one of these worlds, he engaged you fully there. Peter didn't talk much about himself and his accomplishments, and there were many, but he talked with you. One of these worlds was river rafting. I think it was a small act of courage and perhaps defiance, given the sacred place we're in, that Peter asked me to come up and talk about river rafting to you. Now, in Peter's mind, the absolute paragon of Canadian manhood was the Canadian river guide. I might be projecting a little bit here, because there are a number of us here today, but we were pretty special, I think. And when we get together, regardless of the passage of time, the advancement of years, we are guides again. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. We were self-described river gods, of rugged good looks, rapier wits that made us, in our minds, irresistible to all women. We engaged in wildly politically inappropriate humor and stories and some activities, but whatever we actually were, we had a unique and marvelous job. And what we did have was the time of our lives. We all came together working for Canadian River Expeditions, CRE, founded by the legendary Big John Micas and his son, our friend, Johnny. Big John ran expeditions, not just trips. And they included good food, good company, lots of booze, big water, spectacular country, and tons of fun. Peter was drawn to the idea of the expedition rather than the trip, the journey over the destination. And he ended up working on the rivers with the Micases for 25 years, by his estimation, 23 different rivers, many of them remote locations, some of them rare opportunities. Big John's philosophy was very simple. Design a logistically impossible trip, think through every detail, go top drawer, hire a bunch of young, enthusiastic guys, pay them really well, give them enormous responsibility for the good times and safe passage of the guests, and then trust them to do the job. And that's the thing, we were trusted. It was an amazing opportunity for young men like us, and it was the kind of job that Peter thrived in. Peter was excellent on the river. As you can imagine, he was highly competent. He was also great in camp. He could engage anyone of any intellect in an intelligent, informed conversation. He knew how to have a very good time, but under pressure, he was great under pressure, and he proved it often. In short, he was the perfect crew member. In 1981, we did 6 trips on the Chilcotin and Fraser Rivers, and that was, by my estimation, the best crew ever. Luigi, Yatesy, me, and Kay Lee, in that order. Peter took the 4th trip off to get married. On the 3rd trip, we had a stag that I believe involved flashlights, naughty magazines, lots of Bushmills Irish whiskey, and as I recall, one of Peter's virtuoso recitations of Eskimo Nell in full, from memory, with feeling. Peter loved poetry. A trip later, Peter came back for the honeymoon with his blushing bride. I'll never forget meeting Joanne for the first time at, appropriately, Honeymoon Point on Chilco Lake. We wore our best thrift store outfits for the occasion as Joanne bounced out of the plane, laughing and loud, already having friended everyone in the trip. And as I've said in other places, we've loved her ever since. To me, it was a beautiful thing that, because of Peter's determination to do so, many years later, we were able to take our families together, Joanne and the girls, along with Greg and Andrea, Tim, Nancy, Hannah, Gabe, Jimmy, Johnny, down these rivers of our youth. Peter continued to do at least a trip every year with CRE for over 2 decades, and Joanne was complicit in this. When Johnny asked each year if it was okay to take her husband away for a trip or 2, Joanne said, "Yes, not that I want him gone, but he's so much more pleasant when he comes home." Peter's partner in crime was usually Johnny, someone very special in his life. And John, I know that you two admired each other very much, and Peter wanted me to make it clear how much you and your father meant to him, what an important influence you were in his life. He was grateful that you gave him the chance to become a guide. He learned from both of you. And Jimmy, Big Jim LaValle, Peter also wanted me to make mention of the special place he had for you in his heart. And I think Johnny and Jimmy, you two, and of course Greg, especially Greg in those last days, you returned that affection and loyalty to Peter in his final days. When Peter and I talked about this service, and yes, he did prepare notes for me, quelle surprise, he reiterated to me the importance of the expedition, the adventure with like-minded people. And now, as Brian so wonderfully wrote, Peter is on his next adventure, his next expedition. Peter and I shared one more thing. Later in life, I became an English teacher, and Peter generously shared his resources and his outlook with me. It was an important influence on me. We talked often of literature and poetry. Peter quietly sought a spiritual path through this world. So I'd like to leave you with this poem by Rainer Maria Rilke, who also contemplated a spiritual life in a secular world. It is from his Book of Hours, Love Poems to God. I think Peter would approve of this one. I believe in all that has never yet been spoken. I want to free what waits within me, so that what no one has dared to wish for may for once spring clear without my contriving. If this is arrogant, God, forgive me. but this is what I need to say. May what I do flow from me like a river. No forcing, no holding back, the way it is with children. Then, in these swelling and ebbing currents, these deepening tides moving out, returning, I will sing you as no one ever has, streaming through widening channels into the open sea. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Well, being a Welshman, I feel very touched that Peter would have chosen or requested this Welsh hymn at his service today. It was introduced to the school about 10 years ago, so many of you who've been at the chapel gatherings the last 10 years know the hymn very well. It's certainly one that is a favorite with the staff and the students alike at the school, and when you see the words and hear the tune, you'll see why. So if you all can turn to the hymnals in front of you, please, or to the side of you or behind you, the black books. It's hymn number 94. And to have the full impact of this hymn, believe it or not, we actually sing the chorus in Welsh. And when you look down, you'll see it's been written out phonetically there. And I'll go through that with you. So it goes like this. Calon, lan, and llawn daioni. Tecach yw na'r lilid los. Dim ond calon, lan allgani, canu'r dydd a chanu'r nos. Wonderful words, and I can understand why Peter loved this hymn. So, to be sung with gusto. Thank you.
Peter had many passions, and rowing was one of them. Rowing was very important to Peter. He was introduced to rowing at UBC, where he rowed as a lightweight, and he later coached. There are many rowers in this room today, and rowers, as I've always said, are perversely different. Rowing is the only Olympic sport that had its genesis as a form of criminal punishment, and it's the only Olympic sport that officially sanctions physical abuse. Our next speaker is Andrea Staff. Andrea and Peter were very close. Before there was Silken Laumann, before there was Marnie McBean, there was Andrea Staff. She was the first female single sculler of any notoriety in this country. She was to go to the Olympics in Moscow in 1980. She did go to the Olympics in Los Angeles in 1984, where she missed a bronze medal by millimeters. Andrea came to Shawnigan at Peter's request and suggestion, where she coached and had significant success as a coach. Rowing was dear to Peter, rowing was dear to Andrea, and she will talk about the connection.
Thank you, Brian. First of all, let me say that I'm absolutely honored to be here to be able to speak about Peter and his thoughts about rowing and coaching. And where do you start? There's so many things about such an enormous man that had such an enormous impact in so many aspects of his life. And this, certainly rowing and coaching and things that evolved from his involvement in that, certainly was a period of time where there were many, many significant relationships and connections forged for lifelong periods of time. So for friends, lifelong friends in all sorts of areas. People have come together because of Peter and rowing here, this country, other countries around the globe. And I just want to nod out to our friends in New Zealand. I know Sarah Davis and her friends are watching. Peter shared some of his fondest memories of his start in rowing with Ilona Smith, who was a coxswain of many a UBC men's crew and women's national team crews, and he shared some stories with me. I'd like to share a few of the stories that he relayed to Ilona about his UBC days, and then I'll speak about a few of the stories that he shared with me. And again, we got some instructions on what to say, as is typical of Peter. 1976, Peter was actually an avid skier, as you've heard, in the gym training, as it happens, with a bunch of rowers from the UBC program. Fortunately for the rowing world, it wasn't a particularly great snow year, and it's not like that ever happens in this part of the world. So what better than to be in the gym training with a fit, athletic, like-minded bunch of guys? And so began his foray into rowing, first as a novice, then as a member of a very successful lightweight program at UBC, coached by Jeff Allison and Ken Ray over the course of the years that he was there. One of his favorite memories was that he relayed to Ilona was of the long, long, long rows that they enjoyed in Deep Cove, how much he liked those sessions for the beauty, the peacefulness, the camaraderie of his crew, and also for the giant mound of pancakes that they all had afterwards. It was also at UBC where he began coaching in his final year, and he had a crew comprised of novices and experienced rowers, and as he noted, more experienced than himself. But he also recognized that a group with a common goal, common work ethic, could pull together, make something special happen, and could go places. And this is where I think Peter excelled, where he was a master, and where his abilities truly shone. Shared experience, belonging, a common goal, in short, teamwork, mattered a great deal to Peter. His UBC stories wouldn't be complete without mentioning the connection that he and UBC had with Norman Hildesheim, a New York Times rowing correspondent who developed a soft spot for the UBC rowing program, and in particular, Peter and his 1980 San Diego crew, crew competing at the San Diego Crew Classic in 1980, but traveling on a shoestring budget. Suffice to say, all were delighted, I'm sure more than delighted, when Norman arranged different accommodation to what they originally had planned. Accommodation that did not require sleeping bags, although as I understand it, there were a few tense moments trying to get the truck and the 60-foot boat trailer in and out of the circular entrance of a rather posh downtown hotel. On to the Shawnigan rowing story and coaching. He shared some of his favorite stories with me in his final weeks that I'll cherish. And here are a few of them. His JV crew from 1983 and his first trip to Henley, memorable for him. Peter had 3 weeks with this particular crew prior to Henley. No coach boat, and yet he found one. He borrowed a coach boat and he got that organized. And he simply took it on and forged ahead, as he always did in these sorts of things. He continued to coach that crew for another 4 years, his 87 crew, as he fondly called them, a very, very special group of young men. Also special to him, his 89 crew, who came together through adversity, rising to the occasion. And the occasion that he described to me, and I love this story, was the 1989 Canadian Secondary School Rowing Championships. He had 2 fours, a straight 4, and a coxed 4 there. Borrowed boats were arranged, but as it turned out, a few more than expected were arranged. In all, for a variety of reasons, the boys rowed, if I've got the facts correct here, 5 different boats in 6 races. For those not familiar with rowing, this is not what you want, not at all ideal. But he simply carried on and he got to work. He rigged, then he rigged again, and then he rigged one more time. And sometimes the boys didn't have more than the time to row to the start to actually get comfortable in the boat. And yet they succeeded. They achieved, nonetheless, both crews coming home with silver medals. I really love that story because to me it speaks not only of the talent of the boys in that particular group, but of the considerable talent of the coach. Peter's leadership and trust that he instilled in his athletes to be able to do that, to be able to rise to the occasion. He also talked about his 3 years of coaching girls, how much he learned, how different it was, how much he enjoyed it, thoroughly enjoyed it, and the special relationships and connections that have resulted. Above all, he valued teamwork. His goal was always to teach his athletes to become self-reliant, work together, work toward a common goal. For me, as a friend and a colleague, I saw Peter as a program builder, a master coach, and a master facilitator. He worked from a place of high trust, giving respect and the space to allow you to get on with the job. He trusted you to do what it is that you were to do. And I always felt in every conversation with Peter that he was fully present. It was, someone asked me Brian and I were talking, asked me how to describe what was it about him that just made it that much more special. And what I came up with, personally for me certainly, was that he was fully present at any time you had a conversation with him. So what you said mattered. You better get it right. And that's one of the things that I really appreciated. He was not just listening, he was really, really listening. And I have no doubt that many of you here today shared a similar experience or shared many similar such experiences. And I think that's a gift of Peter that we can all treasure, certainly one that I will. Rest in peace, my friend, as you go onward.
As you've probably gathered, the one quality that seems to run through Peter's life and his exposure to these many facets of his life is leadership. Peter was a leader. He was a leader in practice. He also had the ticket. He took a master's degree in leadership from Royal Roads University. And our next speaker was a co-student with Peter during those days. Star McMichael is going to speak about Peter in a more spiritual sense, and I'm told that she's going to deal with the touchy-feely stuff.
It's quite an introduction, Brian. Thank you. I should clarify that I was not part of the RRU Master's in Leadership group, but I did meet him here at the Summer Leadership Institute. But I will say that I got instructions and notes. Thank you, Allie. So good afternoon. Back in November, when Peter asked me to speak today, we discussed his lifelong interest in leadership and what that meant to him. It will come as no surprise that out of the many different forms of leadership, being of service was the most important. Peter chose to formalize his education in this field with a master's in leadership at Royal Roads University. He selected RRU because the people attending the program came from all walks of life. He told me that he came to care very deeply for the cohort that he worked with. And one of the outcomes from this connection was his involvement in the summer leadership, which was held here at Shawnigan Lake School for a number of years. Peter shared his love of this campus with us, and we in turn have many fond memories of the beautiful grounds, the lake, Duxbury House, ghosts and all, Marion Hall, and the Hydley Pavilion. He said he found it energizing to engage with a circle of people who promoted and loved to explore thoughts about creating a better world, apparently now affectionately known as the Touchy-Feely Group. People who respected the flow of innovative ideas, of positivity, of new ways of seeing and being. He enjoyed spending time with people who walked the talk. And no one exemplified that better than Peter Yates. In the final days of Peter's life, I was honored to observe and experience his gift of giving of himself. He would say to those that came to bid him farewell, "What do you require from me to move forward?" I witnessed this time and again. He would receive their love, amplify the energy of it, keep a measure for himself, and return the rest. Those that came in sadness left encompassed in his gift. When I shared with Peter that it appeared to me that he was building a raft out of that energy with which to pass over to the other side, he responded, "That's quite the metaphor, Star." The best way that I can describe it is, if a person could be said to have done dying well, then Peter certainly did so. I would hazard a guess that he has raised the bar for many of us. In honor of Peter and with his blessing, I would like to read the following poem by Alfred Lord Tennyson. Crossing the Bar. Sunset and evening star, and one clear call for me. And may there be no moaning of the bar when I put out to sea. But such a tide as moving seems asleep, too full for sound and foam, when that which drew from out the boundless deep turns again home. Twilight and evening bell, and after that the dark, and may there be no sadness of farewell when I embark. For though from out our bourne of time and place the flood may bear me far, I hope to see my pilot face to face when I have crossed the bar. Thank you.
Our next interlude is a musical one. Drew Yates, Michael's daughter, will sing Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah.
I heard there was a secret chord that David played. was strong, but you needed proof. You saw her bathing on the roof, her beauty and the moonlight overthrew you. She tied you to a kitchen chair, she broke your throne and cut your hair, and from your lips she drew the hallelujah. 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 Baby, I've been here before. I've seen this room and I've walked this floor. I used to live alone before I knew ya. I've seen your flag on the marble arch. Our love is not a victory march. It's a cold and it's a broken hallelujah. 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 Maybe there's a God above, but all I ever learned from love was how to shoot at somebody who outdrew ya. It's not a cry you hear at night. It's not someone who's seen the light. It's a cold and broken hallelujah. 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 Hallelujah.
Thank you, Drew. That was beautiful. Peter will be smiling, and he will also probably be crying. And there are those in the room who will be doing the same. Our final speaker is Alec McIntosh. Alec graduated from Harvard in May. Now, there is a very unique connection between Harvard University and Peter Yates. Of the last 5 students from Shawnigan Lake School to attend Harvard University, all were day students and all had a very strong connection with Peter. They include the chair of the Board of Governors of this school, David Shieldrop. Peter was a mentor to so many students, and Alex is just one of these. Alex is going to talk about Peter as a mentor.
Thank you, Drew. That was beautiful. Good afternoon, everybody. It's an honor to have the opportunity to share some words with you today that reflect on Peter's impact on my life. I'm lucky to have known the Yates family for as long as I can remember, with many Macintosh and Yates family dinners, day trips to the Gulf Islands, and chilly Saturday morning soccer games where Allie would beat up on me on the field. From a young age, Peter was a constant source of guidance in my life. After counseling my parents on the opportunities that awaited my brother and I here at Shawnigan, we arrived in grade 9 with one of the school's best educators as our advisor. While it was a bit of a transition to refer to him as Mr. Yates, it was kind of actually harder going back to Peter. Through our formal and informal advising meetings, I was quickly exposed to what Peter probably did better than anyone I know, and that was listen. He was the ultimate listener. I have so many memories of visiting him and Rug, the Yates' dog, in his office beneath the socials hut. After dodging drying wetsuits and life jackets, I would sit down across from him and we would discuss whatever issue was pressing in my life. Whether it was related to something in the classroom, something happening with the rowing team, or anything else. Peter would sit back, listening while nodding his head, interjecting with a few brief observations here and there, and the meeting would go on with me doing most of the talking. But I always marveled at how, despite me being the one who had been speaking the whole time, I would leave an interaction with Peter having found the advice and guidance I was seeking. Instead of me asking the questions hoping for an answer, it was Peter who would simply respond to my question with another question, quietly encouraging me to ponder a situation further. I believe that early on in his life, Peter developed an appreciation for this kind of growth, the kind of growth that a person undergoes when they have to work through a problem or a difficult decision from within themselves. I don't recall any time when Peter ever gave me a straight answer on something. Perhaps he possessed the wisdom to know that there is never only one way of doing something or one single path to follow, but rather that one should explore within themselves to find the answer they seek. Throughout our lives, especially in a competitive boarding school or university environment, students and young people often go to mentors to seek advice on that one thing that will make them happy, bring them success, or solve their problems. Instead of offering the solution as the mentor, Peter took a different tack. Instead, he would ask the questions, not that he was looking for an answer, but rather looking to help you come up with one for yourself. I believe this sets him apart as an educator and mentor. Using Peter as an example, you could make the case that the best mentors don't really actually do the mentoring, rather they allow the student to mentor themselves and foster the organic and healthy growth that comes as a result. The classification of legend gets thrown around a lot, perhaps sometimes too casually, but we can all agree that Peter Yates was a truly legendary figure in every sense of the word. You need only look at the picture on the cover of today's service booklet as a reminder. The loss of such a legendary figure in my life is something I will carry with me for all of my days. He is everything I aspire to be. His passion for the outdoors, his strength and vitality, his kind and wise nature, these are all qualities I admire deeply. It isn't fair that we had so little time. I had so much more to share and learn with Peter. It isn't fair that Allie and Lizzie had so little time with their dad. None of this is fair. And yet, I feel blessed to have learned so much from one person in such a short time. And I will take his characteristically subtle teachings and apply them to my life. As a young man with so many questions lying ahead and a seemingly endless sea of answers that will be tricky to navigate, I can take refuge in what Peter taught me. When I hit that hard spot, I'll be able to stop and ask myself, how would Peter have approached this challenge? And I'll remember that he would have encouraged me with his wise and all-knowing smile to look within myself, for that is the only place to find what you seek. Steve Prefontaine said, "To give anything less than your best is to sacrifice the gift." I believe that Peter lived this credo, and I believe the consequences of this admirable way of life are truly felt across the globe. The example he set forth every day and the lessons he imparted upon all of those in his life will live on. They'll live on if we do what he did with such grace, and that's honor the gift. So I challenge all of us to live like Peter. Let us perpetuate the gifts his wisdom bestowed upon us and go out to create our own magnificent selves in the same way Peter lived his magnificent life. I'd like to close with a story today that Peter wanted me to tell. On my flight home to the island to visit him in the hospital in late November, I was reflecting on what I wanted to share with Peter during what would likely be our final visit. Like all of us, I couldn't comprehend why a man who had done so much good and had so much good left to do on this earth was being ripped out of our lives. It truly burned me up inside. It just didn't make sense. And then I remembered a story he had shared with me back in the fall of grade 11, on the day we had to put our family dog down. I don't remember really anything that happened that day, or what people said to me, or the days afterwards, except for this one thing. Peter had sent his condolences to my brother and I upon hearing the sad news from my parents, and he included a short story about a family who also had to have their dog put down. In the story, after the dog had passed, the family were gathered around in tears, reflecting on why dogs only live a fraction of the time that people do. At this point, the little boy of the family piped up to say, well, people spend their whole lives learning how to be kind, love others, and be loyal, but dogs already know how to do all that stuff, so they don't have to stick around as long. When I remembered this story, it became perfectly clear that in the case of Peter Yates, the same applied. Peter was the dog that already knew how to be kind, loyal, and love others. The testament to the power of such a wise and inspiring spirit is seen before us today in this chapel. My yearning for more time with Peter will never fade, but I think we can all adopt the attitude of the little boy in the story and be faithful that Peter had long ago figured out how to love deeply, serve many, and live fully. His life certainly represents all that and more. Thanks, Peter.
In a curious way, Shawnigan Lake School isn't the only institution that owes a debt of gratitude to Peter. Harvard University does as well. I'm going to close with some remarks about Peter, and particularly about Peter and his connection with this place, Shawnigan Lake School. Peter loved this school. He came here in 1980 primarily as a rowing coach and a newly graduated teacher of English. When he was at this school, he occupied many roles and did many, many jobs. He always felt that he was privileged to be here. This institution gave him the platform from which he was able to pursue all of the passions, some of which we've heard about today. He was very privileged, and he said this very often, to have worked with such a talented group of educators. And many of you are here today, and you know who you are. He was thrilled to have been part of a group. Some of you are getting a little long in the tooth, but he was just thrilled to have you as colleagues. The jobs that he had ran the gamut of most of the jobs in an independent boarding school. He was, and this was probably the least of his jobs, a classroom teacher of English. He was a rowing coach. He was the head of rowing. He was a housemaster. He was the head of the English department. He was the head of athletics. He developed the outdoors program. That outdoors program morphed into the EDGE leadership program, which in turn morphed into the program that saw students from this school go overseas to Thailand and other places to provide assistance to needy people in developing countries. Shawnigan provided him with all of these opportunities, and for the administration and the executive in the school, I say on behalf of Peter, thank you very much for the opportunity. Peter's great legacy arising from his experience at Shawnigan is not what happened in the classroom. It's not even what happened on the lake or within the bounds of the school campus. It's what happened outside of the gates. Peter will be known as the person who provided so many students on outdoor expeditions, whether they were camping trips, whether they were kayaking trips on the Gulf Islands, or trips to Tofino to do some sea kayaking, or even mountaineering trips. Those experiences with Peter are what are going to live with his students long after they have forgotten the conundrums of grade 12 calculus or the past subjunctive of the French verb. They will remember those experiences, and that is Peter's great legacy to this school and to the constituency that forms the alumni of this school for the last 33 years. In closing, because we are approaching Robbie Burns Day, I would have liked to have been able to recite a favorite poem of Robbie Burns, and unfortunately I don't have my Burns with me. And Dave Robertson, I'm sure, would be able to help me out on this one. But it is a poem that talks about people, as all of Burns' work did. And it talks about people of high rank and high honor. And the closing words of that poem are, "An honest man's the noblest work of God." Peter Yates was an honest man and one of the noblest works of God. Thank you.
So I'm torn now, having mentioned Burns, because I'm not supposed to say anything at the moment. Sorry, Peter. But Peter used to invite me into his English classes every year to authentically recite a little bit of Burns. So I have to do that just for you, Peter. But Mousie, thou art no thy lane, and proving foresight may be vain. The best laid schemes of mice and men gang after gley, and leave us naught but grief and pain for promised joy. I think all the words have been spoken, and how beautifully they've woven a perfectly appropriate tapestry to an outstanding man and an outstanding human being. He asked that I recite the Founder's Prayer, and in that prayer, it talks about yielding the true glory. And I would submit that today's words and today's reflection and today's service would epitomize the true glory that PDY deserves. Please bow your heads for the Founder's Prayer. Lord God, when thou givest to thy servant to endeavor in any great matter, grant us to know that it is not only the beginning, but the continuing of the same until it be thoroughly finished, which yieldeth the true glory. Amen. Thank you, Peter.
The second hymn that Peter requested for this morning is all in English, you'll be relieved to know. Amazing Grace is the Lakes House hymn. Brian just mentioned that Peter was a housemaster. He was house director at Lakes for 5 years. And I think he was a Lakes man through and through. And if there's any doubt about that, the answer is the fact that this was the hymn that he wanted to end the service with. So it's hymn number 7 in your books. And Kelsey McDaniel, another Lakes man, will sing the first verse as a solo, and we'll join him on the rest of the hymn. I invite you to stand.
I once everybody. I'm Allie, Peter's daughter, for those of you who don't know me. And I just wanted to take a moment to thank you guys all on behalf of my mom, Joanne, and my sister, Lizzie, for taking the time out of your day to come. My dad would have loved to see everybody he loved under one roof, and it would have meant a lot to him that you all came. So I just wanted to close with a quote that my dad and I shared that I'm sure lots of you will appreciate if you haven't heard it already. And that is, to the well-organized mind, death is but the next great adventure. And I think that summed up my dad very well. He was ready to go on his new adventure, and those were some of the last words we spoke to each other. So if you could all join our family over in Marion Hall for some refreshments, that's where we're headed next. Thank you for coming.
And I'll just close by again saying thank you. And we are a little over time. Peter won't mind. I would like to acknowledge, amongst Peter's other directions, was that we be accompanied on the organ by Nick Fairbank, who is also one of Peter's students. So thank you all. We'll see you across at Marion Hall. And if you want to linger outside, what a beautiful day for doing so. Thank you.